The rise of industrialization has been identified with the age of coal, steam and iron, and also as the moment when the modern concept of scarcity took shape. By the third quarter of the 19th century, it had become clear that a new environmental equilibrium was emerging. Puzzling as it may seem, the fact is that the adoption of mechanical machinery, railways, steamships and long-distance communication was accompanied by growing concerns about the possibility of running out of coal. And since Great Britain was at the forefront of other nations in terms of fossil fuel production, internal consumption and exports, its economy was naturally more exposed to the threat of depletion. He was born in 1835 and died in 1882 in England. His father, Thomas Jevons, was an iron merchant and his mother wrote some poems. They had 11 children and Stanley was the ninth. The family was a Unitarian, a liberal branch of the Protestant Church that bases its religious beliefs on reason, and Stanley was brought up with these beliefs. There is very clear evidence in Jevon's later writings of the Unitarian influence. They were a family in a very good financial position. The railway boom crisis of 1847 caused the bankruptcy of the family firm. In 1863, he became a tutor at Owens College, Manchester, and in 1865 a lecturer in political economy and logic. His intimate knowledge of the physical sciences greatly contributed to the success of his chief logical work, The Principles of Science. After studying chemistry, he was a metals analyst in Australia, and only on his return he was able to finish his degree. He soon made his way in the English intellectual world of his day as a logician and economist, and in 1871 he published his most important work, The Theory of Political Economy. His book also paved the way for the use of differential calculus in economics, thus making a line of development that in many ways continues to this day. In 1867, Jevons married Harriet A. Taylor, and they had 3 children. They moved to London in 1876, and he's taking up a chair at the University College. He resigned his chair in London in 1880 to concentrate on writing. He drowned while swimming when on holiday in the south of England, but the most likely cause of the accident was that he suffered a heart attack or stroke. And speaking of the marginalist revolution, which deeply changed the way of doing economic theory in the last third of the 19th century, the names of its first 3 protagonists are always mentioned. Working in complete independence of one another, Jevons in Manchester, England, Wohlers in Lausanne, Switzerland, and Menger in Vienna, each scholar developed the theory of marginal utility to understand and explain consumer behavior. The theory held that the utility or value of each additional unit of a commodity, the marginal utility, is less and less to the consumer. When you are thirsty, for example, you get a great utility from a glass of water. Thirst quenched, the second and third glass are less and less appealing. Feeling waterlogged, you will eventually refuse water altogether. Value, said Jevons, depends entirely upon utility. This marginal revolution marked the opening of a new period in the history of economic thought. Stanley, in 1951, entered University College with a view to study chemistry and botany. He later wrote that his interest in the way that society worked began in his early days as a student, particularly since he could observe the condition of the poor in London as he walked about the city. He wrote, quote, "I began to think that I could and ought to do more than others. A vague desire and determination grew upon me." End of quote. He was filled with a desire to help, but his aims were on a grand scale, for he wanted to be, quote, "powerfully good," that is to be good not towards 1 or a dozen or 100, but towards a nation or the world. End of quote. The historical period characterized by the fear of coal shortage from 1861 to 1818 has mostly been analyzed through the eyes of Jevons, whose 1865 book, The Coal Question, shifted the terms of the debate with fresh ideas. According to Jevons, the spontaneous logic of the price mechanism steps up the pace of coal depletion in a market economy. Jevons did not devise any escape from scarcity given the increasing pressures brought about by population growth, increasing affluence and consumption, and technological progress. He maintained that whilst land-based economies could attain a stationary state once the marginal return of land decreased to zero, coal-based economies were doomed to fall off when the economically exploitable coal reserves were depleted. The message was stark and alarming. England can thus be viewed as an extreme case of energy servitude to coal in the 19th century. What changed from the end of the 18th century onwards was the growing use of coal in industry and the shift from an organic economy to a fossil-based one. From then on, coal was not only used for domestic purposes and in a few industrial sectors, mainly the textile and iron industries, it progressively became the staple of the British economy. So, up to the 1860s, the issue of coal shortage and dependence was at the same time perceived and marginalized. And coal was not the only commodity that in his view posed a long-term supply problem. He was also convinced that his forest would be destroyed by the increasing demand for wood. And this meant, among other things, that paper would become a very scarce commodity and that its price would therefore rise substantially. As in the case of coal, Jevons was not a prophet. John Maynard Keynes relates in his elocution of April 21, 1936, before the Royal Statistical Society, quote, "I suspect that his conclusions were influenced by the trait psychological extraordinarily strong in him, and that is in many other people, a certain hoarding instinct, a predisposition to be alarmed and excited at the idea of resolved depletion. A curious instance of this has been related to me by Mr. H.S. Jevons, son of Stanley Jevons. Jevons held similar ideas about a forthcoming paper shortage as a result of the breadth of the demand in connection with the supplies of the corresponding material. And here again, he failed to give the necessary credit to the technical progress. He acted in accordance with his fears and established such deposits not only of writing paper, but also of fine packing paper that even today, more than 50 years after his death, his children have not yet arrived or consumed the stocks of packing paper that he left behind at his death. However, it seems that their purchases were more speculative than usage personal, as his own notes were mostly written on the back of used envelopes and scraps of paper whose proper place it would have been the wastebasket." End of quote. Jevons' life was full of all kinds of vicissitudes and is certainly far from a conventional economist today. In 1871, he published his most important work, The Theory of Political Economy, in which he presented a theory of value that broke with the classical tradition, which considered that the value of a merchandise was determined by its production cost, to link it directly to the utility that the use of such merchandise originates. Apart from his great contribution to economic analysis, Jevons analyzed many other topics in his numerous research papers. Specifically, he dedicated one of his books to the problem of energy, which for many students of economic thought constitutes a clear precedent for some of the current ideas on sustainable development and the disappearance of energy reserves. Jevons' concern was the possible depletion of Britain's coal reserves, which, in his opinion, will create serious problems for the country's industrial development. He certainly had not been the first to publicize this question, which had already been discussed even in Parliament at Westminster in the early 1860s. But the publication of the coal question in 1865 made him a well-known character in the country. The predictions presented in it were profoundly wrong, and as has happened so many times and continues to happen today, with pessimistic studies on the economic future, in this case Jevons was not capable of realizing that coal could be replaced by other energy sources within a framework of technological development acceleration, as it was in Victorian England and as it is to an even greater degree in our world today.